Hello and welcome to part 6 of my video series on cognitive errors and behavioral biases. You can see parts 1 through 5 if you follow these links here. Again, we're talking about how these types of errors, these types of biases are affecting our analysis and our forecasting ability in negative ways. Let's talk about a few of these. Herding effect is a very famous one. The idea here is that we're just kind of blindly following what everyone else is doing. We're ignoring our own analysis or our own information that we've gathered and just doing what everybody else does. This has perfectly described unfounded bubbles and crashes in the past, including the internet bubble. It was driven in a large part by completely unprofitable companies, but everyone was doing it, and it led to this huge bubble, obviously, ultimately, to its crash. Regency bias. This is just a way of thinking in very short-term ways, okay? So we think about the recent past and kind of ignore the full-term history. It's kind of a time-weighted analysis. We're putting a massive amount of weight on what's happened most recently. This has directly led to a lot of problems where we buy high and sell low, whether that's securities or mutual funds or whatever that might be. This is well documented and something we all fall into. Outcome bias. So here's one thing that we think. So we'll base things on the outcome and not necessarily the process. So if we think about this, think about, hey, someone in the past, made a ton of money following this particular strategy. We don't really think about what the situation was at the time. Maybe, interest rates were conducive to that strategy working out and they're not now, but we're just strictly going off of the past. The other thing here is that we tend to reward the outcome and not the decision. So if you think about probabilities, imagine you had a scenario where 70% of the time you would be correct and 30% of the time you would be incorrect. That would be, in finance, an extremely attractive decision to make, to go and make that investment. But because even though it's a very good decision, doesn't necessarily mean that the outcome will reflect that decision. So with a 70% chance of success, you still could end up failing. Unfortunately, we tend to judge people on the outcome and not the decision. But you really should be thinking about these probabilities and making sure that your decision, given the current information, makes sense and is a good decision. Status quo bias. So this is a little bit counter to kind of this herding mentality or this regency bias, because those things can cause you to change. The status quo bias is this tendency to just go with whatever is the current, right? So if you think about your 401k investment, most people will just go with whatever the default investment is for them. So whether that's cash, whether that's some life cycle fund or whatever it might be, they tend to go with the default. This is true for a number of things. Now, when you think about regency bias, herding, status quo bias, the important thing is that you actually do the analysis based on what you know today, given today's circumstances, and make the best decision. So you just don't kind of blindly go with, your gut in terms of herding mentality, or regency bias in terms of what's happened in the past, or just doing nothing because it's easier. You actually do the analysis and make the best informed decision that you can. Gambler's fallacy. So this is the idea that you tend to link events that really are completely unrelated. So if you think about a coin toss, every time you do it, you have a 50-50 chance of getting heads and a 50-50 chance of getting tails, assuming it's a fair coin. Now, you could have gotten 8 tails in a row, but it doesn't mean that now you're going to kind of catch up on the heads. It just doesn't work that way. Previous series of events are unrelated to the current situation. They're all independent. Again, you want to think about what are the probabilities of this event today, given everything I know, ignoring kind of these series of events that have led up to this, and think about what the possible outcomes are going to be. Again, don't relate things that aren't related. Again, really here, this is just to inform you about this. Ultimately, you need a way to engage your system 2 brain to kind of counteract the system 1 cognitive errors and biases. We will eventually talk more about that once we've gone through all of these different types of errors that we all have, that we all think we're better off than other people, and that's simply just not the case. Hope you enjoy it. Thanks so much.